Why do the UK's Prime Ministers keep resigning? Keir Starmer is the latest to step down after nearly 2 years in office. He'd been expected to put an end to the political chaos. So, what went wrong? And what does it mean for the future of the UK? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. From a landslide victory less than 2 years ago to a remarkable downfall this week, Keir Starmer is quitting. He's the sixth British Prime Minister to step down in the last decade. His resignation came one day before the anniversary of the vote to leave the European Union. Many say Brexit has been one of the main drivers behind the leadership crisis. Others point to increasing public discontent over successive governments. Starmer's departure will set in motion a contest to replace him as head of the Labour Party and PM. But will his successor be able to succeed where so many other Prime Ministers have failed? We'll talk to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
He's Prime Minister number 6 to resign from number 10 Downing Street in the past decade. Keir Starmer stepping down, saying he no longer has the trust of the Labour Party.
Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party.
Poised to replace him is Andy Burnham, who recently won the by-election in Makerfield.
Rome is saved.
Sarcastic quips as he is sworn in as Member of Parliament. For many, a sign his tenure may also be fragile.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The revolving door of Prime Ministers at Downing Street began spinning exactly 10 years ago when Britain voted to leave the European Union. Analysts and politicians widely blame Brexit as the catalyst for divisions within the UK and among Parliament. The shocks of multiple global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic and the rising cost of living after Russia's invasion of Ukraine have also hurt the British economy. And that has put constant pressure on leadership. The emergence of right-wing parties like Reform UK is adding to the turmoil.
Whoever becomes the Prime Minister will not have been voted for by the British public. And if the next Prime Minister is the new MP for Makerfield, Andy Burnham, he didn't even stand at the last election on any manifesto at all. And I really do think that my call for there to be a general election as soon as is possible, I think you'll find a lot of support for that.
Larry, the beloved Chief Mouser at Downing Street, will welcome his 7th Prime Minister after he or she is elected by the Labour Party by September. And on a satirical social media account, Larry also appears unfazed by the constant change in political leadership. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Jennifer Nadel is the co-founder of the cross-party think tank Compassion in Politics. He joins us from London. Tim Bale is Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London, and he joins us from Sussex. Zaid Belbagi is Managing Partner at Hardcastle Advisory, and he also joins us from London. A warm welcome to each of you. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I do want a thought from all of you about Keir Starmer. Begin with Tim first. How do you go, Tim, from being the man that brought a landslide victory to being the most unpopular Labour politician amongst his own party in 2 years? How does that happen?
Well, I think you have to remember that he was never particularly popular, even as an opposition leader. He was exceptionally unpopular in some ways for someone who won a landslide victory. And you also have to remember that that landslide victory was won on just 34% of the vote. So going into the election, Labour was not that popular, and coming out of the election, it wasn't either. As far as Keir Starmer is concerned, I think he made some very serious early mistakes. There were some policy missteps. I think trying to remove the winter fuel allowance clearly went down very, very badly. There were a number of U-turns as well. He seemed to have lost control of his parliamentary party when it came to welfare. And people might remember he also was seen to be guilty of accepting all sorts of freebies at a time when he was trying to take benefits away from other people. And he never really got out from under that. It might be illogical for people to say that they just don't like a politician, but I'm afraid in Keir Starmer's case, that was very much the case. So he did do some good things. You know, there was the Renters' Rights Act, Workers' Rights Act. As far as people on the left are concerned, they were good things. But I think they were outweighed by those very early policy missteps. And of course, in the case of many progressive voters, I think some of what he said on Gaza very early on really upset people.
Jennifer, your thoughts? What went wrong for Keir Starmer?
He didn't have the leadership skills that are needed for today's age. He didn't know how to connect. He didn't know how to reach hearts and minds. As Tim has said, he also made some big policy missteps. He came into power with this landslide victory, and he didn't really change anything. It was a moment in British political history when people wanted change. They wanted an end to the chaos and the cruelty that had preceded Starmer's election, and they wanted to see a kinder politics, a bolder politics, and a politics that came from the heart. And instead, you know, he may be a very good technocrat, but he did not reach, and he certainly didn't communicate the sort of vision that was needed. He didn't help heal the division that had arisen from Brexit and the nasty politics. Instead of setting out a stand for a new kind of politics, he tried to echo some of the crueler policies of reform on the far right of the UK political spectrum. He engaged in anti-immigration rhetoric, which was not what the party wanted. And he also didn't listen to his party. I've met so many backbenchers who arrived on the wave of that election win who didn't even get a chance to speak to him. They felt like their voices weren't heard, their views didn't matter, and if they tried to stand up for the principles upon which they were elected, they were then admonished by a very strictly controlled party machine.
Zaid, your thoughts?
Further to what Jennifer said, the leadership skills were something, but the communication skills were also lacking. This is a leader who never was able to pass the slightly monotone and uninterested standard of leadership that he exposed. Let's not forget, his integrity is not in question. He inherited an absolute nightmare from the perspective of the integrity of previous governments. However, the two big missteps for me were the winter fuel allowance and also Gaza, which he got spectacularly wrong, completely misreading the public mood. However, the communicative style, his rather drab, uncharismatic and uninspiring style, I think was a gift to the scriptwriters and in the end was his undoing.
Well, I hope you guys never have to do an obituary about me. Let's talk about the substantive issues here. I want to start with Tim. Tim, 7 prime ministers in a decade. You know, that's extraordinary, but it does suggest that something is broken in the British political system. Can you identify what that is, if you agree with that statement?
I think you do have to point to the economy as being a problem. We have very slow growth in this country, very low productivity. When you add to that the financial crash and obviously the effects of Brexit, you have an economy that just isn't generating the revenue that would allow government to meet some of the pledges that it's made and some of the promises that it's either made explicitly or at least hinted at. And I think the failure to deliver in that sense has been a problem for politicians. I also think politicians, to be honest, are guilty of making promises that they can't possibly keep. The most obvious example of that would have been what the Conservatives were saying about immigration, particularly when it came to stopping the boats, quote unquote. That was never going to be something that Rishi Sunak, for example, could do. And yet he continued to major on that. leading to an awful lot of frustration among, culturally conservative voters who believed that Brexit was going to deliver all sorts of cuts in migration, and particularly illegal migration. So we've got to a situation where really voters don't trust the politicians, and politicians to some extent are a little bit guilty, I think, of treating voters like children and not levelling with them and being quite clear about some of the trade-offs that they face. And in Britain, it can't be the case that we can have European levels of welfare and healthcare on American levels of taxation. Something has got to give.
So 10 years ago, to almost to the day, Britain voted to leave the European Union. Brexit happened, and we've had 7 prime ministers since then, or about to have 7 prime ministers since then. Those things have to be related, right?
I think Brexit was more a symptom of a wider malaise in politics. I agree with what was said just prior to me. Former Prime Minister Sir John Major said recently that being Prime Minister is not part of a reality TV show. And with Starmer aside, in a potential Burnham government, we will have the 5th Prime Minister who is effectively unelected. And what that process means is we have a continuation of leadership which is mediocre, whose politics is mediocre, driven by the soundbite, the 24-hour news cycle, and policies like Brexit, which are catchy at the time, have long-term consequences. But I think the wider problem is what we said earlier, which is growth. Politics has moved on from the very simple debates of whether we should spend less or tax more. What we need is growth. And without growth, the same problems will continue. At the end of the decade, which is just around the corner, there will be 5 million people on disability welfare, effectively for international audiences. A quarter of working age people my age, are getting some sort of welfare allowance. And unfortunately, that cannot continue. Taxing people that already work and are taxed, in every moment of their life cycle is not going to solve an ever-increasing welfare bill, which is going in the direction of France. And that is what concerns me. We need a radical overview of how we look at growth.
Jennifer, one of the things that struck me about the last 10 years is it's not just about Brexit, it's about the rise of social media. It's about the rise of impatience with politics and being able to vent that frustration much more easily than perhaps we were able to do before. Prime ministers simply just don't have the chance to do any good now in a 24-hour, as I pointed out, social media landscape, right?
I think media can be a force for good, but at the moment it's the Wild West. It is not regulated sufficiently. We have those with most money able to influence what most people see. We have the tech bros in America interfering in our politics and even stoking violence on the streets of Britain. So social media has a really detrimental role in what we're seeing in the UK. But I think something else has happened. I think that Brexit unleashed a kind of nastiness, the normalization of views that previously had only existed on the fringe of politics suddenly entered mainstream dialogue. And the framing slipped from Britain, a compassionate country, a country that cared about everyone, that had this incredible national health service that was built from the ruin and rubble of the Second World War, to a nation that viewed anyone who tried to get to our shores as a dangerous criminal rather than someone just seeking to better their lives or flee persecution. And we saw language really deteriorate. We see that in the House of Commons during Prime Minister's question time, and we also see it in the way that some politicians communicate on social media. So yes, social media is an issue, but something was unleashed by Brexit, a normalization of hate, of polarization, of division. And we need to somehow get that genie back in the bottle and remember who we are as a nation and what Britain really stands for.
Tim, we need to get that genie back in the bottle. The genie effectively is Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, which has dragged politics, every single political party, to the right. Is that something that you agree with, and how do you deal with it?
I think it's definitely true that the centre of gravity of the political system, particularly when it comes to cultural issues like immigration, like what some people call woke, has moved to the, if you like, authoritarian right. And I think Nigel Farage is in part responsible for that, although I wouldn't altogether exculpate the Conservative Party, because they've spent a lot of time really since 2016 chasing Nigel Farage in many ways, and Labour to some extent has chased after the Conservatives. So there is a sort of great moving right show, if you like. What we can do about that, I think, once again, comes back to politicians being prepared to level with people about quite how difficult some of the things that they have previously promised them actually are. I think it's also the case, to be honest, that when it comes to the mainstream parties like Labour and the Conservatives, they really do need to listen to, and I would say this as an academic, the research evidence that suggests that actually chasing populist radical right parties and extreme right parties doesn't in the end result in you preventing your voters from leaving you for them. All it does is just increase the salience, the importance of the issues on which they thrive, and decrease the salience and the importance of the issues which actually benefit you. So it's not only, I think, futile, it's actually in the end quite counterproductive. And I think mainstream parties ought to realise that.
Zaid, the mainstream parties need to realise that there is a problem. That's what Tim effectively is saying. But we are in a democracy. If they want to push out far-right, hard-right ideas in order to appeal to the prevailing winds, that's fair enough, isn't it?
To an extent, however, the issue is slightly more complex. I agree with Tim that social media has created polarisation. However, the best remedy to such polarisation and this pull to the right is good government. And if the incoming Prime Minister is able to put together a achievable growth agenda, then the adverse circumstances and the stagnation that encourages people to look at more radical politics will be less appealing. The best resolution to all of this is growth. We must be understanding of the problem, the fact that there has been a pull to the right. However, the economic circumstances are such that we cannot afford to engage in further demagoguery, but have to look at longer term solutions. If a Burnham government ends up in another leadership contest within 18 months, then we're back to the same problem. We've had more prime ministers in the last 10 years than we did in the last 40. And this is really quite worrying in circumstances where the leader of the government needs to inspire financial markets, needs to have their confidence, and stop chasing sound bites. You would have noticed there was a great fallout over defence spending, and the Ministry of Defence is only asking for £28 billion to reach where they need to reach. Burnham's plans to nationalise the water industry could cost over £100 billion. Now, that is a direct example of a soundbite written to entertain a specific demographic, which is a waste of resources and a waste of everyone's time. What we need are more achievable goals that will inspire voters, rather than going through prime ministers, like the former Prime Minister Sir John Major said, like a reality TV show.
You make an interesting point, Zaid. I want to put it to Jennifer. But before I do, Jennifer, I saw you shaking your head there at the figures. We won't get into that right now. But what I do want to ask you, is there a problem now with the traditional two-party system? Because, you know, you have got Reform, you've got Restore as well as another hard-right party, but you've also got the Greens on the other side making the case. It seems that people are looking for an alternative to that two-party system. Is that what's happening?
I think they absolutely are. They don't feel represented fully by either of the two major parties that have traditionally dominated UK politics. But I think we also need bold ideas. And those ideas could well include taking industries that should belong to the nation back into some form of public ownership. It doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money. There are many different routes to take water back within public control. But at the moment, we don't have control over what the costs for our citizens are of essential services like energy, like water. And so we do need some of the big, bold ideas that we've seen Burnham and also the Greens talking about. I think the other thing that hasn't been mentioned in this conversation is redistribution. We are still the 6th richest nation in the world, but a lot of our wealth has gone to those who already have a lot of wealth, and leaders have been very cautious about trying to bring in a form of taxation that would try and redistribute some of the wealth. We know that those countries that are healthiest politically often have least division between the rich and poor. They tend to be flatter. There tends to be less of a disparity. And since the 2008 financial crash, that division between the very, very richest, I'm not talking about those who are comfortably off, I'm talking about the very, very richest in society, their wealth has grown exponentially. And that has to be part of a solution. So we need bold ideas, and to think that only two parties have the solutions is really narrow. We have an outmoded way of doing politics in the UK. Anyone who's watched our Prime Minister's questions can see that. We shout, we jeer, we bully, and we need to grow up. We need a modern, functional way of government, and that means not having tribal warfare between two parties. It means not having a first past the post voting system, and it means creating an environment in which collaboration, in which the best ideas can come forward without everyone trying to make political capital out of whatever the other side suggests.
Tim, it's a very interesting use of the word archaic there that Jennifer just used. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to, talking about redistribution of wealth, you get a lot of very, very, very rich people very nervous, and they'll use that money to influence using social media campaigns, tech bros, we've just talked about it earlier. Our system, our political system, is not geared up for the modern world. That's the accusation. I want to find out what you guys think. I'll start with you, Tim.
Well, to some extent, 'twas ever thus. I mean, I think rich men have been using the media to try and persuade politicians to do what they want since time immemorial, to be honest. I don't think there is that much change there. I do think, however, that Jennifer's right when she talks about some of the archaic aspects of our political system. Given that we are in a 5 or 6 party system now, it does seem crazy that we are continuing with the first past the post system that was designed really for 2-party politics and is no longer delivering it. And there is a big risk actually at the next election, given that Keir Starmer was able to win a huge majority on just 34% of the vote, that someone could win a majority with just 28, 29% of the vote, which would, I think, produce a government that had very little legitimacy at all. One encouraging thing for me anyway about Andy Burnham is that he is committed to electoral reform. Whether we can have that simply via the parliamentary route or whether we have to take it first through Parliament and then to a referendum, I think is another question. But I do think there are quite a lot of constitutional questions and procedural fixes that to some extent would improve politics in this country.
Zaid, do you think electoral reform then is the silver bullet we need?
I think it would definitely help, especially vis-a-vis the rise of new, more nefarious political actors. However, what needs to happen is much broader than that. I agree with Jennifer that there are elements of political life that are archaic. But in addition to that, the idea that Robin Hood economics of just simply raiding the very wealthy will solve everyone's problems are also outdated and archaic. What we need is growth. The way we work is changing. We're in the midst of the 4th industrial revolution. In an era of working from home, there's a huge cohort of currently of people on welfare who are at home, who can work. However, they cannot work presently because were they to, they would be worse off because of taxes. Looking at a situation whereby we support people to work digitally, to implement AI into their work streams would mean that there'll be more growth for the government at the end.
Right.
The issue is looking at these old mechanisms with which to redistribute wealth in a society where we also have corporation tax, personal income tax, and other taxes along the way at the highest levels they've been in history is very concerning. And like I said at the beginning, and former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who leaded this initial new Labour push, has warned last week that the level of people on welfare is unsustainable.
Jennifer, this idea that growth is actually a key, which is what Zaid is talking about, is that kind of neoliberalism argument that the free market actually is, the cure for everything if it's managed correctly. It's something that Andy Burnham seems to be very, very against. Isn't that a radical enough idea for him to capture the public, or do you think it needs to go further?
Well, an idea has to be coupled with action, but it's certainly the case that any argument that trickle-down economics works, that Blairite idea that you can just let the rich get richer and somehow we will all benefit, is well and truly in the economic dustbin. So now we have to look at how we create economies that work for everyone. So take, for example, AI, which could lead to a redistribution of work so that all of us work less hard, but all of us benefit from it. Or it could further polarize the haves and the have-nots. And what will distinguish the impact that it has is whether or not the government governs. And one of the orthodoxies that has really taken hold is that the state gets in the way of good government. I would argue the difference. The state is there to ensure fairness, to ensure social justice, and to ensure that things work as well as they possibly can, not just for the benefit of those who are particularly skilled in one aspect of life, but for the benefit of everyone. So I think we need good government. I think also at the time of a climate crisis, to talk about growth, unbridled growth, is clearly way out of date. We need to talk about sustainable growth. We need to talk about regenerative growth, and we need to look at different
Jennifer,
ways
we are running out of time, and I want to put one of your points to Zaid. Zaid, you talk about growth, but Jennifer's talking about the fact that we need bigger ideas than that. Anything that you've heard so far changed your mind on the fact that growth is the silver bullet?
Yeah, what I specified was on different kinds of growth. The idea that growth is in the economic dustbin is something that any economist will, ask you to leave the room after expressing that opinion. Growth is the only solution in circumstances where 5 million people in 3.5 years' time will be on welfare or disability allowance. This is completely unsustainable, and you need money to pay for all of these different schemes. The idea that this cannot be done.
I'm so sorry. You have twice completely misrepresented points I've made. I said that the idea that trickle-down economics works belongs in the dustbin, not that growth belongs in the dustbin. You're deliberately misrepresenting what I'm saying.
Oh, no, not at all. I was in the midst of
Sorry, guys, we have actually run out of time, and it has been a very spirited discussion, and a spirited discussion that I think is going to go on for a long time. I want to thank all our guests, Jennifer Nadel, Tim Bale, and Zaid Belbagi, and I want to thank you as well for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Imran Khan, and the team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in a moment. Stay tuned.